This is the Beaverkill, that poem of water, that meandering ribbon in the heart of New York's Catskills, the greatest single trout stream anywhere on this earth. There is no other body of fresh water that presents quite the same ultimate challenge to anglers. No other place that draws fishermen from all over the world. It is the spot where fly fishermen pay homage to their greatest adversaries of brown, brook, and more rarely rainbow trout. This is the river where American fly fishing began. It's the river that Lee Wulff chose to live on. It's the magnet that has drawn all the greatest sports fishermen to test their hand-tied flies against the smartest and wiliest trout in any stream. It's the river of final truth, flowing into magical pools with names like Junction and Hendrickson, Cairns and Ferduns, Wagon Tracks and Horsebrook, each with its own character, with pockets, eddies, and riffles that challenge an angler's knowledge and test the limits and skills of each fisherman's predatory instincts. It is the shrine of trout fishing at its finest. The Beaverkill is where legends are made, and where Lee Wulff loved to cast his unique flies to catch trout. These were Lee's last moments on the Beaverkill. He left us with a treasure chest of memories. He was 86 years young when he passed away, and he never once lost the joy of catching yet another fish and releasing it for the next fisherman to catch again. We watched him out there in the river in orange autumn as he stood patiently in the water, scanning the pool for the next rise, and we knew that there was the master, the artist, the consummate sportsman, fly fishing the poetry of the Beaverkill waters. As Lee Wulff says, I was born to fish, and that he was. And this film is dedicated to him.
I'm Michael Gold. Join me on the Beaverkill, and like the river, let's meander downstream from Junction Pool and then meet up with Lee and Hendrickson's. Junction is really the most famous pool on the Beaverkill and is considered to be the symbolic heart of fishing in the Catskills. It's the spot where the Willowemoc River and Beaverkill meet just outside of Roscoe in a pool of interesting currents and eddies. And it's the home of the two-headed trout, a species unique to Junction Pool. These are trout that simply could not make up their minds which heads of the rivers to feed from. Junction Pool is the symbolic site for celebrating opening day of the trout season every April 1st. The next pool we come to is Ferduns Eddy, and that begins right at the middle of the screen, just beyond those wires. That's the riffle water at the head of the pool, and it extends all the way down around that bend. In the summer, there are very heavy hatches on this pool, and that all flows into Barnhart's and then eventually into Hendrickson's. Now we're on Barnhart's pool. That riffle water is the head of it at the bottom of the screen, and it's a very long pool and a favorite and very challenging stream for professional fly fishermen. It extends all the way down and also has very heavy hatches that flow into Hendrickson's. And the riffle water, the tail of Barnhart's is at the middle of the screen right now, and that tail goes right into the head. It extends as part of the head of Hendrickson's pool. Hendrickson's, which we're coming to right now, is a wonderful pool filled with boulders and pocket water and smooth flows, and it's also a favorite of many, many fly fishermen.
All right, you ready to release him? This is a good way to release. You just take hold of the hook, lift him up, and he'll drop off. That's a royal wolf, and God knows there's nothing that a fish has ever seen alive on a stream that looks like it. Completely unnatural pattern. You need a little fairly strong thread, but as fine as possible, because when you fasten bucktail to a hook, it takes some strength to hold it there in position. Another thing that's important here again is to make sure that the body is secured to the hook so it won't twist. So again, contact cement. This particular contact cement is called Pliobond, and it is soft. It dries solid but not rigid. The Royal Wulff was one of the first three of the Wulff series, because I had decided that the British type of flies, which were very thin-bodied, almost anemic, weren't as attractive to American trout as a heavier-bodied, bigger individual bite for them would be. So at the time, back in 1930, the flies, most of the flies we used in the Catskills, the British flies, were all the flies were made with feather materials, which were not very durable and didn't have the stiffness to hold a fly up on the surface well. So I decided I would use bucktail for the wings and tail, which would give me greater durability, greater floating capacity, and would carry the heavy body. And so I made a tail of bucktail and wings of bucktail. The tail is on now, and I'll put the body on. I made a gray one which imitated the Isonitia mayfly, and a white one which imitated the coffin mayfly, and then the royal, which was a change from the royal coachman, which had feather wings, which were not durable, and had a different tail, which was not durable. A Royal Wulff tail was just fibers from a golden pheasant.
How did you get the name Royal Wulff?
It was, well, from the royal coachman. It had all the color and so forth, and I think they figured that when they first made a royal coachman in England, that was for royalty. It was so beautiful. And it is a beautiful fly, and of course it doesn't look like anything a trout ever saw or expected to see. There is no such insect, and but that doesn't seem to bother them. They are just as happy to take something they've never seen before as they are to take some of the old standbys. In fact, this is probably the most popular of all the dry flies And it doesn't look like anything a trout ever saw. And the Mickey fin, which is perhaps the most popular of all the streamers, is red, yellow, and silver, and it doesn't look like anything a trout ever saw before. So that we have two things. We can fish for their curiosity, or we can fish for their experience. And overall, I think maybe fishing for their curiosity will catch you more fish.
Do you find this to be your most successful and popular fly?
Overall, yes, it works. It works here on the Beaverkill, where the fish are very sophisticated. If there's not a particular hatch going on at the time, or even if there is, sometimes they'll take it. And in the wild streams, it's a very effective fly because it's both light and dark. You can see it against a dark background. You can see it against a light background. I like to think of this as something special in the way of having a milk chocolate tail, a mint and strawberry body, and vanilla ice cream wings and chocolate ice cream hackles or legs. I don't know what the fish think it is, but I like to think of it that way.
So you create flies out of a sense of whimsy also?
Oh, sure. It's a wide open field.
How many other anglers would ever believe that it could be as much fun as this?
I think an awful lot of them, because everybody creates flies. Now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and some of them, you know, you take the hair from your pet dog, you take the fur from your cat, you create a fly that nobody else can imitate, and you catch a fish with it, and you feel real good. So that anybody can create a fly, a special fly that nobody else can imitate, and anybody can make a fly that fish will take, because sometimes they are very easy to fool. And I've caught trout on wild blueberries and wild strawberries and dandelion heads and pieces of wood and all kinds of things. Anything about the right size, if you make a good presentation, and if it moves, therefore seems to be alive, you've got a good chance that a trout will take it.
When did you start tying your own flies?
Well, I started when I was 9 and up in Alaska when I was a kid.
Who taught you?
Well, nobody. And I just had to scrounge feathers from ladies' hats and the chickens we or our neighbors had and things like that.
Well, had others been tying flies in your area?
No.
You just had never seen it before?
I'd never seen anybody tie a fly. You could buy flies in the store, but there were no fly tyers up there in that little town. In fact, I don't know whether there was a fly tyer in all of Alaska then. That was 1914 when I started.
Do you remember your first fly?
They were pretty bad, I'm afraid. They were on fairly large hooks, on number 6 hooks, because the fish up there were unsophisticated, and so we could catch them on almost anything.
Mostly salmon?
No, trout more than salmon. Salmon up there, were not used to this kind of flies. Again, I like to make sure everything about a fly is well cemented together and going to last. You can't tell by looking at a fly whether your fly tyer really loved you or was just trying to make one the quickest way possible. But good fly tyers do what I am doing and make sure that they're going to last. This winding of hackles to make these fibers all stand out was something that I had no idea of when I lived in Alaska. As a boy was making flies down there, and when I first saw somebody wind a hackle on like this and see this skinny little feather come out into this beautiful whorl of fibers, I was just amazed. It was magic. I'd been sticking them on a few at a time, but of course, at that time we didn't have these fuzzy flies, dry flies. We had mostly wet flies in which you just had a little hackle on the bottom of the fly and not all over the fly. Every once in a while when these things slip, or else my fingers slip, and I have to correct it.
Have you sort of evolved into a standard pattern for the Royal Wulff, or do you change it each time?
Oh, it's a standard pattern. I like to use bucktail, which is what I started with, and it seems to be a little more beautiful to me than using some other hair, which may be more crinkly, it may be a little easier to use, but just doesn't seem to have the beauty. And we like to make beautiful flies. We like to present the fish with something that we think is beautiful and hope that they like it too. There are no trout on the fly judging contests, and if there were, you would probably be surprised at which flies the trout would like best. Probably not the neatest ones, and maybe not what we think are the most beautiful ones. There we have it. And as a pattern, it has withstood test of time. Most patterns get changed and made in different ways, but I tie it just the way I tied it. Everybody else ties it essentially the same.
I get the feeling watching you that you've never lost that boyhood wonder. It's almost as if the first fish you've caught was today.
Well, there is, to me, this whole thing is full of wonder. The insects, this business of an insect being able to change from a living submarine to a living flying airplane in just a matter of seconds is very, very dramatic. And the whole complex of nature is a thing of wonder.
You remember the first fish you ever caught?
No. But I remember I was a little kid, I used to carry them home in my pockets.
Did your folks always live near a stream or a pond or a lake?
Well, we did when I was young. When I lived in Alaska, there was a little stream right behind the house. The fishing was easy, and there were always fish there.
Were those salmon or trout or both?
Both. But as a little kid, of course, I was interested mainly in trout that I could catch on a bent pin and a piece of bacon, and gradually got up to all the things we did in those bad old days of catching them by snaring and gapping, snagging, spearing. Fish were food. They were just...
No holds barred here.
What?
So actually, in all these years, you've been able to see firsthand the decimation of fish and streams.
That's what started me on the catch and release before anybody else. I had seen what it was like in Alaska, and I came east and I thought, my God, it must have been just like that when Columbus came over. And look at it now. And the thing was that this was going to happen everywhere, that this people, there weren't any fish left, and the only way to do it was to recycle them and leave them in the streams. And so I started, I think I had a vision of what catch and release could do and the necessity of it before the rest of the fishermen did.
It is a long step from the day the fisherman's catch meant life and health to himself and his family to our present day, where anglers fish for sport alone. Even the day of the fisherman who consistently hangs up his trophies of the day to brag about is passing too. Pride in accomplishment will always remain, but seemingly angling is reaching new high plane when fishermen can spend a day on the lake or stream catching fish, returning them to the water again unharmed, to come home empty-handed. That angler keeps no trophy to show his fellow men as proof of his prowess, but contents himself with the pleasure of a day well spent in the surroundings he loves. He has fished for sport and not for glory. Upon him and those who follow his leadership, the future of angling depends.
Lee, what is it about Hendrickson's Pool that makes it so appealing to you? I know it's one of your favorites.
It's a good pool. There's a lot of flat water up above, and that's good for food for the fish. See, the water is so shallow that trout won't be up there, and if the nymphs are more plentiful in that kind of water than they are in the pools where the trout are naturally. So with all that good feeding food water to draw from, this is a very good pool. See, between here, as we go down, the water is slower and a little deeper, and so there are more trout all the way through from here to Cairns, and you don't get that wonderful banquet of food coming out of this water that you do coming into this pool.
Seems to have a deep riffle and then a low riffle and an interesting flow coming into the body of the pool.
Yes, well, in normal flow, you've got to flow all the way through, and this food spread out and carried all the way down.
We'll rejoin Lee further down Horsebrook. In a run like this, where it's all riffles, what is the nature of the trout here, the way they lie?
Well, this is what we call pocket water. There are deep places and then shallow around. The trout need a certain depth to feel secure from birds and so forth. So they want these deep pockets. There's a lot of food generated in the shallow water around them, and each trout will pick a place, and he will hold that for his own and drive out any lesser trout. Very territorial when there is a difference between the amount of food and the safety in any one place as against another.
Are all trout considered to be part of the salmon family?
No. The brook trout is a char, which is not the salmon family. They're very similar fish, but and they really shouldn't be called a trout. But the British, when they came over here, found a fish that looked like their trout, so they called it a trout. When they were in Newfoundland, they found ptarmigan, which were much like, even though they changed color, were much like the English partridge, and so they called them partridge in Newfoundland. So this is a sort of thing. Things get names that aren't really true names for them. I'll show you a cast that I developed. In developing small rods, I had to make little rods do what big rods did. It's like the French with rapiers. Before that, you had to hack a man's head off when you needed a broadsword or a halberd to kill him. French came along with a rapier, and you make a little hole in his heart, and he's just as dead. And in as much as they said you couldn't catch big fish, salmon, on these little trout rods, why, I decided to do it when they told me I couldn't do it, and I did. And I had to make little rods do what big rods did, and I did it because as an engineer I knew that speed doubles the energy and weight only changes at the same time. In other words, the square of the speed times the weight is how you measure it. So if I doubled the speed, I would quadruple the energy. So I went for speed. Most people were casting here. I cast from here to here, not knowing then that a baseball player could make his hand move 95 miles an hour. I knew I could make mine move fast, that with the flip of the rod, so I made little rods do it. But in doing it, I had to get a back cast, a long back cast, and in as much as a little rod puts your line lower to the water, I had to find a way to keep my back cast out. So instead of most casting, your fly makes figure of 8, conventional casting like this. Goes down, comes in, goes up, drops. Well, I took mine in and made an oval of my fly. Never crosses its own path. So I lifted up on the back of my back cast. I lifted it. And then from here, I had all that distance and I could make long casts with little rods. Then I found that because my line was coming in low, I could use a roll cast technique. I could either cast with a full back cast all the way, I could cast halfway, or I could cast with almost no back cast by the trees behind me. And it opened up a whole field of my being able to cover water where conventional methods wouldn't do it. I can do it better with a line that tapers continually from a certain weight on down, so that heavy line is constantly turning over lighter line. And that's what this line I designed and patented is, what we call a triangle taper. I have heavy line at the tip of the rod and lighter line on down, and so I can bring it in and get long casts.
The distance you cover seems effortless.
Well, it is, and as I say, it's speed. You see, this is my cast. Most people are casting in here. Just limited thing, and so I can shoot line. I have this weighted portion forward, and when I go, it goes. So that with a little rod like this, I can cast 100 feet.
How long is this rod?
This rod is 6 feet 10. Most of the time I fish with a 6-foot rod, which is just about as small as I can go and yet not feel that anybody with a longer rod has any advantage.
Lee, what about the temperature of the water for catching trout at this time of year?
Let's find out.
Just happen to have your thermometer.
Yeah. I better get my line over here.
On the Beaverkill, what would you say the ideal temperature is?
Whether it's the Beaverkill or anywhere else, the ideal temperature is between 60 and 65 degrees. Trout are cold-blooded. '62, a very nice temperature, ideal. You see, trout are cold-blooded, and you and I get kind of numb when it gets cold, and we are not as good as we are when it's warmer. But trout are the same temperature as the water, and when it is cold, they are just unable to do things. They can't digest food, they can't swim fast, they become slowed down in every sense. So that the ideal time, the fish are most active around 60, from 50 to 65. Over 70, they're uncomfortable, they're too hot, and they don't do much. Below 50, they're cold and they don't have the speed and the energy. So it's important to know what the temperature is if you're near the limits. In other words, you come have wonderful fishing, it's 70 degrees, you come back 2 weeks later, it's 80. There won't be any trout there at all. They'll all be gone to where the cold springs come in, or up into the tributaries where the water is shaded and much cooler. These are all facets in fishing that you have to understand, and understand how the trout feel about them, what they do, what they can do. Harry Darby used to wade this river, and he always waded wet so that he could feel the water temperature, and when he found a cold spot, he would remember that and figure that there would be more trout there in low water than there would be in other places in the river.
Lee, do you use a wide variety of flies when you fish?
Not really. I carry a wide variety because I'm interested in a lot of things, more than just presentation. But normally, in a given day, I don't use very many flies. But I like to be able to pick up my vest and say, I can go fishing, and whether I'm fishing for big trout, little trout, fast water, slow water, whatever it is, I've got it all there. So I have a terrific amount of gear available. And my vest is very heavy because I carry spare reels, I carry lunch, carry whatever is necessary, and the only thing that keeps you on the ground in fast water is the weight above the water, because you don't weigh anything underwater. So by carrying 15 pounds or more in my vest, I was able to wade where people who didn't have that much weight above the water couldn't wade. And if you can wade where other people can't reach, people they can't catch fish that they can't reach, that's how you build a reputation.
Do you ever fish at night?
Very little. I don't like to fish for trout at night on the stream. This is such a beautiful, delicate, precise thing that when you get it out at night and can't see anything, it loses its charm. Fishing a lake for bass at night, explosive rises, so it's fun. Because you can fish it just as well in the nighttime as you can in the daytime, but here, when you can't see the rocks and you can't see the pockets, how do you fish it? You're limited in your fishing, and it's not as exciting to me. You do catch big fish, and the way to fish at night is to go out and know where a fish lies, find a really good hole, and go there at night and fish for this big brown trout that has learned not to come out in the day when all the fishermen are there. And you catch beauty.
So it's that sense of beauty that's just as important.
Well, to me, I mean, I'm not fishing just to catch big fish. And so I like to feel that I fish well, I use my tackle well, and I enjoy making a good cast, a good presentation, and fooling a fish that I know is there and can watch. I can't see at night whether a fish has come up under the fly and looked and turned away because my leader was too thick or the fly wasn't quite right. But in the daytime I can see all those things. So daytime trout fishing is much, much more exciting than night fishing.
How would you describe Cairns Pool?
Well, Cairns Pool is a very long pool. The water flows in and it's a long, deep, steady with a slow flow through it, which is ideal because where you have a flow like that, the fish will lie all through the pool. When you have a quick inflow and a quick outflow and just very steady water in between, they tend to lie where the flow is. And there's enough flow all through this to give fish whatever it is, either breathing water or whatever it takes. You can catch fish all through the whole length of this pool.
Is there a particular spot in the pool that you prefer?
Well, it's where the fish are rising. When they're not rising, up at the head of the pool is where you're most likely to find the hungrier fish, because that's where the food is carried into it. Otherwise, you've got food rising from the bottom coming to the top all through the pool, the insects that are hatching out.
I was wondering if we could talk about your thoughts regarding the intelligence and instincts of trout here on the river.
Well, it's very important to understand the fish. Fish are not intelligent. Your cat or dog is 10 times as intelligent as a trout. A smart trout is only smarter than another trout. The essence of the thing is that you have to know what keeps him alive, what his instincts are. Because, well, for instance, could you spin a spider web? Yet a spider with a brain the size of 1/100th of a speck of sand can do it. There are lots of things, instincts that are deep, and they are the things that have kept fish alive, made it possible for them to live and survive. If you take a pair of beaver, put them in a swimming tank, feed them lots of branches and stuff they need, have them live there for 3 or 4 generations. Now these young beaver haven't seen a tree for, well, 3 generations. And yet, you turn them loose, the first thing they'll do is cut down trees and build a dam. So those patterns of life are what you need to know about the trout. And you need to understand that they are predators. Now, they're mid-range predators. They can be caught and eaten by other things, but they catch and eat things. So you'd figure half the time they should be scared to death, and the other half they're scaring something to death. But no form of life can live scared to death even half the time. They've got to develop a way to relax, a sense of safety, and so they're like zebras on the Serengeti Plain. They have a zone of safety within which they feel secure and can feed contentedly and so forth. And there, I got it through. And so it's, as I say, a zebra out in the Serengeti Plain. If he's got a lion 100 yards away, he goes right on eating. He glances over there once in a while, but he's not terribly upset. And the lion gets to be 50 yards from him, he's really watching him all the time. He takes a mouthful and takes a look, takes a mouthful and takes a look. And that goes on. If the lion gets 35 yards away, he runs like hell. So you've got to get to give the fish his zone of safety, or else let him relax because you are there long enough and quiet enough so that you don't form any threat to his safety. And so it's important to understand the fish. And to understand him too, you must know that he has three major things to think about. He wants to be safe, and he wants to be well fed. He has to get food enough, and he has to be comfortable, or at least in an environment in which he can survive. If it gets too hot, he dies. So he's thinking of those three things, and you have to think of those three things for him, and where he will be under what circumstances. Now, the predator part of it is that he has a daring, he has a pride, he wants to be good, he's competitive with other fish, other trout. He wants to be as good or better than they are. He's highly competitive, so that he will chase things just for the hell of it, to catch them, to show how good he is. These are all what we call human characteristics, but practically all animals have them one way or another. And that's the important part of understanding fishing. If you understand the fish, you can manage to catch them. If you don't, you have to cover a lot of water and take your chances that you'll be right enough at the time. The best fishermen are good predators themselves. Watching a good fisherman work on trout is like watching a cat stalk a bird.
Lee, in a larger context, isn't it your feeling that man has never lost his own predatory instincts?
That's right. You see, every one of us alive is alive because in our background there were good hunters. If not, they starved. So we have a heritage of hunting, and it's quite natural that those instincts would be available. You have to believe in heredity. But if you're not going to be a great musician like Rubinstein unless there's musical talent in your background. You can't have anything in your kids that isn't in the background behind you. And that's hard to believe, but it's true.
In your case?
I don't know. I think my mother probably, and my father too, both had some hunting and fishing instincts. Because I was sort of born to fish, I think. I loved it. My mother started me before I was 2, and I just have fished and loved it all my life. Yes, I was born in Alaska. My father went up in the gold rush. My mother came up to join him from Brooklyn to Alaska right after 1900.
How can you tell whether fishermen are good predators or not?
Well, just the way they look at fishing and what they do. The tenseness, the intentness. That it's an instinct to know what to do, to have in the back of your mind, how do I do this, how do I do this? And so when the situation suddenly develops, you don't have to stop and think. Instinctively, you do what is most deadly toward your prey.
We've been talking about fishermen being predators, but I'd like to ask you again about no-kill fishing and how it originated.
Well, as a political thing, which it is. It's a management tool. I publicized it first. I talked about it first, wrote about it, made movies about it, showed putting fish back. And people say, look at that crazy guy. What's he going fishing for if he didn't put the fish back? All that kind of thing. And I started in the early 30s, and in 1936, I coined the catchphrase. I said, a good game fish is too valuable to be caught only once. And that was picked up by a lot of people. Gradually, the concept came along. It's like recycling anything. You use it twice, you get twice as much good out of the same resource. And of course, fish became very scarce. Trout have no place to hide. They're not like fish in the lake where you can go down in different depths. If it weren't for no-kill, we wouldn't have a school. Fishing is more challenging now. You have to know something, just like the fish have been to school, being taught by the fishermen that catch them. And we have to be much smarter to catch them, use finer leaders, and match their food much better.
Lee, you've created some of the most innovative flies ever tied. Most fishermen seem to try to imitate nature with their flies, yet your attitude seems to be totally different than that.
Well, it's not totally different, but I do think in terms of, as a great many of us do, in a fly that looks beautiful to me and I think would look interesting or challenging to a trout. But I always have in mind the things, the size of their mouths, the things they can get into it, the things that have attracted them. And through the years, I've seen them take different sized things. And so you just sort of design out of your knowledge. And things change. In fact, one of the most recent things I've done that I think is very intriguing is that back in 1950, the plastic worm developed. Before that, we had worm imitations, but they were stiff. And when the bass grabbed that stiff worm, he spit it out immediately. When they made these soft worms, that if a bass grabbed it, it felt like a worm, and he munched on it a little bit, they began to catch lots more bass. So it occurred to me that if I could make a soft nymph that the trout would take and hang on to, you have a better chance of hooking them. They won't spit it out so fast. So that's one side of it. I can make a soft nymph. We'll start out this time with a number 16 short-shanked hook, which is a very short hook that has the least shank, the least size to upset the fish if he feels it in his mouth. Looking for a piece of, well, this will do, piece of fly line, which is soft. And I'm going to wrap the body of this stonefly nymph imitation around the fly line, which will bend and feel just like a real nymph. They won't spit it out. And that's a great advantage for the fisherman, because most of the time when a fish feels anything unnatural in what he takes into his mouth, he spits it out. He's constantly doing that anyway. He's testing things. He's taking a piece of wood that comes floating down, a little wood chip, because he thinks it might be alive. The minute he takes it and finds that it's hard, he spits it out. So we will build the body around this soft fly line. I will be constantly putting on contact cement to make sure that it sticks together, but also the contact cement never gets really hard. will always bend a little bit and be like, well, like something alive.
What are you using now?
This is black Angora wool, which gives me the head of the insect. And of course these insects are not exact as much as they are general imitations. And I'll put on some hackle so that I can trim it later to make legs where legs ought to be.
The hackle is from what?
This is a hackle from a leghorn rooster that was dyed gray. A great many gray legs and gray bodies in the insect world. Then I'll put on a little bit of bucktail. Because I want something to bend over the body behind the head to imitate the thorax of the insect. Now I have that in position. I will put on the main body color, gray, and again it's gray Angora wool. That indicates the thorax. And then I will put on the legs. Bend the bucktail back. And at each turn, I'll just make sure that it's going to stay together.
That tool you use, is that a special fly tying tool?
Yes, it's called a hackle pliers, and it's the reverse of a pair of pliers. It snaps closed. You snap down on something and it tightens right down. And holds it so that you can wind with it, because we like to wind our hackles. All of our good fishermen now have learned to play fish on small hooks, so there is no need to have a big hook for bigger fish. we can put any fly on any size hook. And that is a real break with convention, because up until now, all flies had about the same amount of material on each one, depending on the size. If it was a number 6, they all were about the same amount of material. In order to make this look a little more natural, I'll trim the hackle so that the legs come out on the side of the insect, which is where they normally come out. Will look a little more natural. And you see that now is soft. When a fish takes hold of it, it feels like it ought to be good to eat, and you'll hang on to it for a while. And that little hook, that 16, is big enough to land a 15 or 20 pound fish in the hands of a skillful angler. Trim off the thread ends. Trim the hackle. Trim a little of the hackle on the top and bottom. And we have a very fancy looking nymph. This is a number 28 hook, the smallest eyed hook that's made. And even that hook is, the fly will probably be a little larger than some of the midges. This is a very difficult hook to tie a fly on, a very difficult hook to play a fish on. But we're getting much better at fishing with small flies. All of our fishermen now are becoming much more skillful at playing fish than they ever were before, because we have found that they feed so often on these very small flies, and we're catching them at times when they can't be caught on any other fly except a very small one.
What's the largest size trout you've ever caught on a 28?
The largest trout was a steelhead of about 9 pounds. And I've caught Atlantic salmon on number 28 too, 12-pound fish. But I made the flies bigger in those cases just as an exercise in how big a fish you can catch on so small a hook. Actually, I don't think very many 10 or 12-pound fish would feed on so small an insect. But on standard flies like this, like the one I'm about to make, I have caught fish up to 5 pounds.
In the Beaverkill?
Not in the Beaverkill. Beaverkill about 2 pounds. But if I fished long enough, I would probably catch a 5-pounder in the Beaverkill on a fly this small.
Do you usually use 28s or 24s on the Beaverkill?
I think I use 24s or smaller as much as I do any other fly, any other size fly. It's hard to find these hackles small enough for...
What kind of hackle is this?
This is the hackle from the neck of a Plymouth Rock rooster called a grizzly hackle because it's black and white. I don't know where the name grizzly came from, but it seems to fit it, and everybody calls them grizzly hackles rather than Plymouth Rock hackles. Wind thread on to build up the body a little. All right. Most of these midges have transparent wings, so that it's not necessary to put on a set of wings to imitate the particular fly.
Are you twisting the hackle around the body now?
Yes, that is what gives it the flotation and the look.
Do you use any special knots?
Any knots? Well, I take half hitches at the end, that's all. 3 or 4 half hitches tight around the fly, just behind the eye of the hook. Keeps it from coming apart. And there it is. It's a very tiny fly with a body and a sort of leg wing imitation and a tail.
You know, Lee, this stream is really beautiful from up above. What is the season for no-kill?
Well, no-kill, you see now, is open any time, all year round, because you're not killing the fish. And that is wonderful because it's extended the season. You get fishermen here all through the year. Sometimes in February. Last 2 years ago, when the Russian visitors were here, and we caught fish mostly on these little tiny flies in late October with snow flurries in the air, hardly what you'd think of as typical trout weather. In fact, we used to fish for trout mainly in May and June and not much afterward. But now we fish for trout all year round on these no-kill streams.
Do you feel there's a difference between trout and big game fishing?
Well, there's a difference. You see, trout fishing is an individual sport. And big game fishing is a team sport. It's the difference between being a fighter pilot and part of a bomber crew. And personally, I'd rather be a fighter pilot than a part of a crew. And then if you make mistakes, you take the blame. If you do something creditable, you can take the credit. And you don't have to try to blame somebody else or hope that you can blame somebody else for your shortcomings. You can't go out and catch a record tuna or a record marlin all by yourself. You've got a crew. So it's that difference. And trout fishing like this is the most delicate of all the fishing, most complex. More literature has been written about trout fishing than all the rest put together. But there are some anglers who are smart enough to be good captains, be good mates, be good anglers, to know the whole thing and be able to run it very well.
What motivated you to move to the Beaverkill area?
Well, we came here to start a fishing school because Joan, my wife, is a remarkably, well, she was a champion caster for many years. She's a natural teacher, and she wanted to have a fishing school. So we moved here because it was the logical place to have one. We came down here and there were people walking up and down the streets of Roscoe with waders on, and there were fishermen here, and this was a fishing community, and it seemed like the best place in the world to have a fishing school, and I was amazed that there wasn't a fishing school here already, so we came here to set up a fishing school.
Lee, how do you explain the attraction that draws so many anglers to the Beaverkill?
In the first place, it's a neutral stream. It still runs at about a pH of 7, which is neutral. And so it has a buffering against acid rain. It has good rocky bottom, good trout food. Fish came up and looked at the fly, then turned away. May have been the same fish. And it's a beautiful place, and it's close enough to New York so that it was developed early, and a great many of the New York people who were the ones that were most involved in fly fishing in America Americanizing it, came here to fish. This is probably the premier stream, and the riders used to come up here, stay at the Antrim Lodge, and it developed a reputation better than any of the other streams around. We're going to start this mayfly with a plastic body of a special shape, and we will use a solvent and the plastic polystyrene and no thread. The material will be welded to this body, which is already injection molded onto the hook. First thing to do is to take a few fibers of bucktail and set them in place in order to imitate a tail. A mayfly's tail may have 2 or 3 fibers, but we may go a little bit more than that in order to have a little better floating quality, because flies float on the surface tension. So now we have a mayfly tail in place. We'll put on the legs, and they are so-called parachute type. In other words, the hackle, instead of being wound around the shank of the hook, is wound around the base of this stub of plastic that comes up.
What is the hackle?
The hackle is a dun hackle, a gray hackle. Quite common flies use, because many of the insects' legs are gray. Now I can just let that hang like that until the material, the plastic, sets up. It takes a few minutes for the plastic to reharden after it's loosened up by the solvent, and it absorbs the material right into itself. Down.
Is that your own invention?
Yes. I invented this way of making flies because I thought that if it made more sense to weld steel and to drill a lot of holes and put nuts and bolts or rivets through it, it made sense to stick material onto flies rather than to wind them on with thread, which is very labor-saving, or labor-intensive. This is a much more labor-saving way of making a fly, and they can be made in a production line, which I think will sometime in the future change the way flies are made.
Do they come in different colors?
Yes, you can make, the plastic can be made used in any color. And you, of course, can paint the plastic if you want it any color. Mayfly floats down the stream with his wings tight together. And strangely enough, most of our common mayfly imitations don't have the wings together, they have them separated. It's almost as if the fly purchaser is saying to the fly tyer, look, I'm paying for 2 wings. Mayflies have 2 wings. I want to see them both. I don't want you to put them together. But when you see a mayfly on the stream, his wings are always together like a little sailboat. Just as if there were only one wing, really. Really shouldn't rush these things, because if you do one operation at a time, it's much simpler than trying to hurry it while one is drying to do the other. Okay, I think we can trim this off now. And we have a pretty good mayfly imitation. This is great. How could you do better?
I think he inspired people. When he died, we had so many letters saying, "You were my hero." There are still letters that come to me saying that. There are awards given in his name. He did inspire people because people understood that he was not doing what he did for personal gain, but because he truly loved the resource, the sport. And he wanted to make the sport ever more sporting, ever more enjoyable, but at the same time to preserve the resource so our future generations would be able to enjoy the same things.